Why, hello there, I'm Professor Joel and welcome to another episode of Planet Scooby Reviews. Today we are covering Scoobynatural, which is the 16th episode of Season 13 of Supernatural and originally aired on March 29th, 2018. In this episode, we see the real world of Supernatural colliding with the cartoon world of Scooby-Doo as the Winchester Brothers are sucked into a haunted television set. So I'm not going to cover too much of the Supernatural world in this review, as there are 13, 14, 15 seasons of Supernatural goodness for you to explore. I'm taking this approach more as a Scooby-Doo fan, so if you've never seen Supernatural, don't worry, you should still be able to get the jive of this episode review. So the stars of Supernatural are Dean and Sam Winchester, and initially, after being sucked into the Scooby-Doo world, Dean Winchester is amused to be living in the Scooby-Doo world. However, they soon realize there are dire consequences as the two universes have merged because characters can be killed off, which normally could not happen in Scooby-Doo. Characters can also get seriously injured, which actually happens to Shaggy. He breaks his arm in this episode. So the episode kind of turns into a race against time for Dean and Sam Winchester, the two stars of the series, to catch a real ghost before they, or Mystery Inc., are murdered. And they're also trying to balance out that the Scooby-Doo world stays kind of in their own world and aren't introduced to the supernatural episodes and darkness of Supernatural. So this is a fun episode, but it is not for small kids. If you're under the age of 13, I don't recommend you watch this episode unless you get your parents' permission. It does feature some graphic scenes of stabbings and decapitation. I won't be posting those in my video, those graphic scenes, but I might be describing them in a manner that might require some viewer discretion if you're kind of nervous about that sort of thing. And again, like I said, I will also be approaching this from a Scooby perspective. So if you're a longtime fan of Supernatural, I apologize. I won't be going into a lot of the backstory and history of that. This was a request from Brandon to compare and contrast Scoobynatural with A Night of Fright Is No Delight. So thank you, Brandon. That was a fun request and a bit of a challenge for me because there is a lot to consider when comparing and contrasting the two universes and what happens in this episode. If you'd like to leave a request for an episode review, the details to do that are in the description below. But enough of my jibber jabber, let's get to the review. The episode begins with the Winchester Brothers stopping a giant stuffed dinosaur from ruining a pawn shop. As their reward, the pawn shop owner gifts the brothers a television set. Bringing the set home, the two brothers are mysteriously sucked into the television, where they are now animated and in the world of Scooby-Doo. Fortunately, since Dean's car keys were in his pocket, his trusty 1967 Chevy Impala is in the animated universe as well. Recognizing the mystery machine outside of the malt shop, Dean immediately clues into where they are. Excited to eat massive amounts of food and potentially pick up Daphne, Dean marches inside to talk to the gang. Sam, on the other hand, isn't as excited. He knows the Scooby Gang only deals with small potato bad guys in masks, while in his world he deals with real vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and demons.
Yeah, except our ghosts don't wear masks.
Storming up to their booth, Dean introduces himself and his brother Sam to Mystery Inc. and asks if they can join them. Fred agrees and introduces Velma, Shaggy, Scooby, and Daphne. There is a funny scene where Dean tries to explain to the gang just how famous they are. However, he is dismissed quickly by Scooby and Shaggy, who feel they are more famous for their food eating contest wins. Velma explains that they are at the malt shop to celebrate Scooby inheriting a fortune.
We just found out that Scooby's been named as one of the heirs to a fortune.
It's at this point in the episode where we begin to tie into A Night of Fright Is No Delight, as Velma begins to explain that Scooby had saved the Colonel. Meanwhile, Daphne pipes in that the Colonel was saved from drowning in a fish pond.
Scooby saved him from drowning in a fish pond.
In a moment of absolute dark humor, Sam implies that while Scooby did save the Colonel, the man is now dead. Freddy lowers his head in a depressing moment and replies that yes, the Colonel did die of cancer.
But he's dead now, right?
Yeah, cancer.
Now, I'd like to go on record saying that I do not find cancer funny. Cancer is horrible, and I would love to see a cure just as much as anyone else. What I find funny here is the contrast between the gang celebrating and then Sam kind of ruining the celebration by bringing it down, because the world of Scooby-Doo tends to be just so innocent. And again, this episode contrasts that by bringing in horrible ailments that people actually suffer from in real life. Dean pulls Sam aside and tells him to have a bit of fun and go along with everything.
They're our freaking role models, man. Except Fred, he's a wad.
Sam, always the realist, explains that it's a little challenging to do, especially when the newspaper doesn't even have text and is just pictures.
There are no words in this newspaper, Dean.
Dean offers his and Sam's help as mystery solvers, and Fred accepts. After enjoying a mile-high sandwich, the gang head out to the mystery machine while Dean and Sam hop in their vehicle. A short drag race occurs where Fred beats Dean, aggravating Dean even further, as he feels Freddy is a wad, with his perfect hair, stupid ascot, and can-do attitude. In A Night of Fright is No Delight, the gang took a speedboat to a cliffside mansion. Yet in Scoobynatural, they reach the mansion by their respective cars. So there's a bit of a difference there. Regardless, upon seeing the mansion, Dean recognizes that they are in the Night of Fright episode.
A night of fright is no delight. What? That's the episode we're in.
Inside, it's business as usual. In the reading of the will via a record,
Yeah, classic vinyl.
which we saw in the original Scooby-Doo, goes off without a hitch. Sam, who has experience with the paranormal, is rather upset that a crazy kook would want his relatives and his best friend Scooby-Doo to spend an evening in a haunted house.
The house is haunted.
Velma, who is taking a liking to Sam, insists that there is no such thing as ghosts. Dean pulls Sam aside once more and tells Sam that he has to be careful with what he says around the gang. He doesn't want to ruin the gang's reality. The gang are in a completely different world, and trying to get them to believe in ghosts would shatter their pure and innocent outlook on life. Dean feels that they should go with the flow, but he has his side agenda as he just wants to pick up Daphne. Dean also makes the point that probably to get through this episode, they have to go with the story to reach the natural conclusion, and that way they will eventually get pulled out and back into reality. The lawyer, Cosgood Creeps, wraps up the reading and finishes with a line that he will return to the island tomorrow to see who remains, if any, followed by a creepy laugh.
Turns out he's the bad guy. You don't say.
We saw this in the original as well. Everyone heads to bed and Dean suggests he bunk up with Daphne. She calls him silly and states that boys and girls do not share rooms. Without missing a beat, Freddy tells Dean and Sam that they will be sharing a room with him, Shaggy, and Scooby. In the boys' room, Dean is enjoying wearing a sleeping robe, calling it the most comfortable thing ever.
It's like I'm wrapped in hugs.
Dean tells Sam to just wait, as in a few minutes they will hear the Phantom Shadow go into Cousin Simple's room, where they'll find him missing. The gang will think it's a ghost, but in reality it will be Cosgood Creeps. This is where things start to go haywire and deviate from the original episode, as then we cut to Cousin Simple brushing his teeth. The lights flicker and we see Cousin Simple's cold breath as the atmosphere chills, and then we see the ghost behind him armed with a knife. The gang hear Cousin Simple scream, so they all run to his room. There, Daphne finds Cousin Simple's body with a knife in his back and surrounded by a pool of blood. It's really quite graphic and shocking, one contrasted with the regular Scooby-Doo world. Dean is surprised as the dummies don't appear much later in the episode. If you remember, we saw them in the basement in their coffins from the original episode. Sam inspects the corpse and explains to Dean that it is no dummy and Cousin Simple is truly dead. We then see the gang react with their normal expressions of zoinks, jeepers, and jinkies. Sam is annoyed that the gang are taking the death in stride. However, Velma is doing her best to come up with a logical explanation of what is going on. Castiel, a friend of Dean and Sam, and he also happens to be an angel, strolls into the mansion, and we learn too that he has been sucked into the television set. The gang also discover the hacked apart body of Cosgood Creeps. This scene is very graphic and could be taken right out of the original Hellraiser, as the body is decapitated and dismembered and hanging from rope. Fred looks on and mutters, "That's not good," while Dean and Sam reel back in horror. We have to remember though, in the Scooby-Doo world, they feel that this is all just one big hoax. The gang then split up, with Scooby, Shaggy, and Castiel going one way, Velma and Sam going another, and Freddy and Daphne and Dean going in the opposite way to search for clues.
I once led armies, and now I'm paired with a scruffy Philistine and a talking dog.
Searching the attic, Velma is charmed by Sam and laughs off his statements that ghosts and the supernatural are real. Sam notices a chest covered in ectoplasm and points that out. After being chased by some haunted toys in the attic, Velma writes it off as a prank manipulated by Christmas lights and fishing line. In the library, Dean continues to hit on Daphne, but she continues to show no interest in him. Dean spots a yellow book that stands out on the bookshelf and gives it a tug. A trapdoor opens and the gang end up in the basement where they run into the Phantom Shadow and are chased by it. In a storage room, Shaggy, Scooby, and Castiel find themselves being followed by the ghost. Castiel goes to rip the mask off the spirit, but his hand phases right through the Phantom. Scooby and Shaggy drag Castiel away just at the right time before any harm can come to him. This leads to a fun chase scene set to the Scooby-Doo Where Are You theme song. We have several comical scenes as the gang run through various doors, and we even get a quick shot of Scrappy-Doo. For most of the musical chase, Dean spends a significant amount of time admiring Daphne's figure. After the chase scene ends, Freddy rushes the ghost and ends up getting smacked, causing his nose to bleed. Worse yet, Shaggy is thrown off a balcony and is dangling for his life. Sam and Dean scare off the Phantom using an iron candlestick, as in the supernatural world. Iron can hurt ghosts, while Scooby and Castiel do their best to rescue Shaggy. Shaggy loses his grip and falls off the balcony. However, with some quick thinking, Castiel manages to soften his fall. Still, Shaggy ends up breaking his arm, surprising the heck out of him, as he has jumped out of a biplane in a museum before without any harm.
It appears his arm is broken.
I have jumped out of a biplane in a museum and was fine!
Which is a reference to the episode What a Night for a Night. Sam and Dean then explain to the gang that the ghost is real, and each member of the gang has their own separate epiphany. Freddy is angered that instead of catching people in masks, he could have been out catching Dracula. Even funnier is Daphne, who is finally made aware that heaven and hell are real, and that she could be headed to hell.
We've been stopping real estate developers when we could have been hunting Dracula?
If there are ghosts, that means there's an afterlife. Heaven, hell. Am I going to hell?
I thought I was blind without my glasses.
Scooby and Shaggy are upset at the rest of the gang for never believing them after all these years because they've always known the monsters were real all this time, being the scaredy cats that they are. Dean and Sam do their best to relax the gang, and Dean asks Freddy to create a trap. We then get a similar trap to the one we saw in A Night of Fright is No Delight, except that there is a net of coconuts involved. This makes Sam wonder how the heck Freddy was able to muster up so many coconuts. Dean, of course, tells Sam to shut his mouth. The trap fails as expected, but Dean has a plan B. In reality, he just wanted to see Freddy's trap, but he had a backup plan. So Dean yells over to Scooby, and Scooby pulls the yellow book we saw earlier, sending the ghost down a trapdoor where he is stuck within a circle of salt. In the supernatural world, if you have a circle of salt, ghosts cannot pass that line of salt, so they're trapped. Only Castiel, Dean, and Sam are in the room, and it is revealed that the ghost is a vengeful spirit of a young boy. The boy explains that a bad man had trapped him and was making him do bad things. Sam and Dean strike a deal with the spirit boy and vow to help the boy leave the afterlife, as long as he does them one big favor. Pretending to have caught the Phantom Shadow, Sam and Dean lead the boy disguised as the Phantom Shadow out into the hall. Here, the costume is much more realistic. There, they find Scooby and the gang still in their meltdown mode after learning that ghosts are real. Dean and Sam admit that they were wrong, and the ghost they just caught is a man in a mask. Velma reaches up and pulls the mask off the Phantom Shadow, and we see that it is Cosgood Creeps. Sam and Dean continue to assure the gang that it was a stunt pulled off by wires, a projector, and some dummies filled with corn syrup. Fred then pipes in and figures out that Cosgood was trying to scare everyone out of the mansion so he could claim the $1 million for himself. The plot is now back on track, and Dean reveals that the $1 million is worthless as it is all Confederate money. With Shaggy distracted, Castiel uses his angel powers to heal Shaggy's arm, leading him to believe that his arm was never broken in the first place. With the case solved, the gang head back to the malt shop to celebrate another victory. The last several minutes of the episode is dedicated to Sam and Dean being sucked back into their supernatural reality and freeing the spirit boy from his limbo in this afterlife world. So I give this episode a 10 out of 10. This tribute to Scooby-Doo was an absolute joy to watch, and I feel they nailed every last detail perfectly. Every member of the gang is given their own special time to shine as they interact with the supernatural cast. I really enjoyed the jealousy Dean had for Fred.
They're our freaking role models, man. Except Fred, he's a wad.
And then Dean became like Fred's biggest fan at the end. And Dean and his failed attempts to hit on Daphne were also pretty funny to me. I understand in this day and age of the Me Too movement and all that, you know, some people might be offended by that. But you also have to recognize they gave Velma her own kind of plotline where she's constantly hitting on Sam, and she actually kind of manhandles him at the end and kisses him. So you got to take that into account too if you don't find that sort of thing funny. At least they gave the female side their own kind of comeuppance as well. I also like the interaction between Castiel and Scooby and Shaggy. Initially, he was just like, oh man, I got to interact with this, this hippie deadbeat and this talking dog. And then at the end, he just loved Shaggy and Scooby.
I once led armies, and now I'm paired with a scruffy Philistine and a talking dog.
As everyone else who watches Scooby-Doo probably does as well. On top of this, you get hundreds of other jokes that shine through as the two universes clash.
We've been stopping real estate developers when we could have been hunting Dracula?
If there are ghosts, that means there's an afterlife. Heaven, hell. Am I going to hell?
So there are a ton of clever jokes in this, and a lot of it is just based on contrasting the innocence of Scooby-Doo and the dark and supernatural realism of Supernatural. So that made for some really interesting comparisons. And what I liked in this is how they kind of made the Phantom really kind of scary. They turned him up to 11 and made him really scary. He's not for kids, even though he is still kind of cartoony. They just give him a modern kind of style. And with him slashing at walls, and you could see his jagged claws rip into the walls, and knowing Scooby could actually be hurt, it was actually quite frightening for me. Seeing the murder victims is also shocking, as we've never seen this in the Scooby-Doo universe. And they don't just kind of like quickly show a murder scene. They go really horror movie-ish with this. Like a lot of scenes could be taken out of A Nightmare on Elm Street or Hellraiser. Even though there's 2 murder scenes in this, they don't really show a lot of murder scenes, but the 2 murder scenes they show is kind of shocking. And that is kind of funny in its own regard, and I appreciated that. And even though Sam and Dean are pulled into the Scooby universe, I like how the supernatural rules apply, and they stay true to the supernatural rules. So iron can still hurt ghosts. Ghosts can't pass lines of salt. When ghosts appear, the atmosphere gets really cold, and you can see people's breath as, the body temperature is still warm, but the outside atmosphere is still cold. So I enjoyed that. In the past, we always knew bad guys were fake in the Scooby world, and Sam and Dean had to connect with a spooky ghost kid at the end in order to end the violence. So I liked how, that kind of applied to the supernatural world, while Sam and Dean brought it back to the Scooby-Doo world and kind of made the kid pretend to be a ghost at the end, so Scooby and the gang wouldn't be taken out of their universe mentally, and they could continue on in their lives in their cartoon world. So I also liked how the writers, aside from the meltdown, never let the Scooby Gang break character, and everyone stayed true to their 1970s personas. Daphne really had no interest in Dean. She didn't, have any other alternative emotions towards Dean. She stayed true to Fred, and the innocence of Fred was still there, and the rest of the gang trying to think, oh, this is an actual hoax. And the innocence of Fred just kind of, he wasn't dumb in this episode. It was smart Fred, which I kind of liked. And he still was brave, and he still tried to tackle the ghost. And I like that. And that kind of stays true to the original 69, 70 version of Fred, where he wasn't dumb. He wasn't a twit. He was a smart guy. This episode just felt like a wonderful collaboration between 2 universes, and I like that a lot. What we see usually when, it's Scooby's turn to take the role of introducing guest stars, like in the Scooby-Doo movies, or Guess Who's Scooby-Doo, what we kind of see is often the guest stars kind of shoehorned into the Scooby-Doo world. And in this case, we don't get that. And they probably do that with Scooby-Doo because they want to keep it kid-friendly and consistent with the Scooby-Doo universe. But with this, you do get that contrast, but you do still get the familiar Scooby-Doo world. So you do get some, everything for a fan of Scooby-Doo and Supernatural, which I loved. While I doubt we'll ever see a follow-up to this episode, even though I would love to, who knows? We might. I hope we do. I would love to see a take on it in Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, where Sam and Dean make a guest appearance, either as characters that they play in Supernatural or as their real actors. Either or, I would think would be fun, but I'd like to see the reverse spin, where Sam and Dean discover maybe all the ghosts they've been fighting for the past 15 years have just been shady real estate agents in masks. I think that would be funny. Or, if they can't do it in Scoobynatural or Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, I'd like to see this done maybe in comic book form. There are always comic books coming out with Scooby-Doo, and it would just be a fun take on to see this either as a continuation of Scoobynatural, or again the reverse take, or whatever else the writer dreams up. So once again, I'd like to thank any of likes, subscribes, shares, comments, requests, etc., etc. I always enjoy hearing from you, and I appreciate your comments and suggestions and likes and views. So once again, thank you. And until next week, when we will be covering Nowhere to Hide, stay spooky.
A night of fright is no delight. What? That's the episode we're in.